Chapter 5. And still her grief would not abate. At last she bore another child, and great was the father's joy, and loud his cry, a son. That day, to thus rejoice he was the only one. Dejected and wan the mother lay, her soul was numb. Then suddenly she cried with anguish wild, her thoughts less on the new than on the absent child. My angel in his grave, and I not at his side. Speaking through the babe now held in her embrace, she hears again the well-known voice adored. This I, but do not tell. He gazes at her face. Victor Hugo. Pedro is an extraordinarily handsome Mexican man, more fair than I had anticipated, with sandy brown hair and wonderful blue eyes that at times seem almost green. His charm and easy wit hid the grief he was feeling at the death of his brother, who had died 10 months previously in a terrible automobile accident in Mexico City. Many people suffering from acute grief reactions come to see me, hoping to understand more about death or even to encounter their deceased loved ones again. The meeting might occur in a past lifetime. It might occur in the spiritual state found in between lifetimes. Or the reunion might take place in a mystical setting, beyond the confines of the physical body and physical geography. Whether the spiritual meetings are real or imaginary, they possess a power that is vivid life felt by the patient. Lives are changed. The delicate and often detailed recall of past lifetimes is not a wish fulfillment. Images are not merely conjured up because a patient needs them or because they might make him feel better. What is remembered is what has happened. The specificity and accuracy of remembered details, the depth of emotion displayed, the resolution of clinical symptoms, and the life-transforming power of the memories all point to the reality of the recall. The unusual aspect of Pedro's story was the 10 months that had elapsed since his brother's death. By this time, grief is generally resolving. The long time span of Pedro's grief suggested an underlying, even deeper despair. His sadness actually extended far beyond his brother's death. We would learn in subsequent sessions that he had been separated from his loved ones over many lifetimes, and he was acutely sensitized to the loss of a love. The sudden death of his brother reminded him, in the deepest unconscious recesses of his mind, of losses even greater, even more tragic, over millennia. In psychiatric theory, each loss we experience stirs repressed or forgotten feelings and memories of previous losses. Our grief is magnified by the cumulative grief of earlier losses. In my research with past lives, I was finding that the arena in which these losses occur needs to be enlarged. We cannot go back only to childhood. Earlier, past life losses need to be included. Some of our most tragic losses and our most profound grief happened before we were born. Before anything, I needed to know more about Pedro's life. I needed landmarks to navigate the flow of future sessions. Tell me about yourself, I asked. Your childhood, your family, and whatever else you feel is important. Tell me everything you think I should know. Pedro sighed deeply and sank back into the large, soft chair. He loosened his tie and unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. His body language told me this would not be easy for him. Pedro came from a very privileged family, both financially and politically. His father owned a large business and several factories. They lived in the hills above the city, in a spectacular house within a secure, gated community. Pedro had attended the finest private schools in the city. He had studied English since the early grades, and after living in Miami for several years, his English was excellent. He was the youngest of 3 children. His sister was the oldest child, and even though she was 4 years older than he, Pedro was extremely protective of her. His brother was 2 years older and very close to Pedro. Pedro's father worked very hard and usually didn't come home until late at night. His mother and the nannies, maids, and other staff ran the house and cared for the children. Pedro studied business in college. He had several girlfriends, but no serious relationship. Somehow my mother was never very fond of the girls I dated, Pedro added. She always found some particular fault and never let me forget. At this point, Pedro looked around uncomfortably. What is it? I inquired. He didn't respond immediately, swallowing several times before beginning. I had an affair with an older woman during my last year at the university, he slowly told me. She was older and married. Pedro paused. Okay, I responded after a few moments, mostly to fill the silence. I could feel his discomfort, and despite many years of experience, I still didn't like the feeling. Did her husband find out? No, he answered, he didn't. Things could have been worse, I pointed out, stating the obvious, trying to comfort him. There is more, he added ominously. I nodded, waiting for Pedro to fill me in. She became pregnant. There was an abortion. My parents don't know about this. His eyes were cast downward. He was still ashamed and feeling guilty, years after the affair and the abortion. I understand, I began. Can I tell you what I have learned about abortions? I asked him. He nodded his assent. He knew about my research into hypnosis and past lives. An abortion, or a miscarriage, usually involves an agreement between the mother and the soul that would enter the baby. Either the baby's body would not be healthy enough to carry out its planned tasks in the coming life, I continued, or the timing was not right for its purposes, or the outside situation had changed, such as the desertion of the father when the baby's or mother's plans required a father figure. Do you understand? Yes, he nodded, but he didn't look convinced. I knew that his strong Catholic background might make the resolution of his guilt and shame more difficult. Sometimes our old, fixed beliefs interfere with the acquisition of new knowledge. I went back to the basics. I will tell you only about my own research, I explained, not about what I have read or heard about from others. This information comes from my patients, usually when they are deeply hypnotized. Sometimes the words are theirs, and sometimes they seem to be coming from another, higher source. Pedro nodded his head again, not speaking. My patients tell me that the soul does not enter the body right away. Around the time of conception, a reservation is made by the soul. No other soul can have that body. The soul who has reserved that particular baby's body can then come into and out of the body, as it wishes. It is not confined. This is similar to people in comas, I added. Pedro nodded in understanding, still not speaking but listening intently. During pregnancy, the soul is gradually more and more attached to the baby's body, I went on, but the attachment is not complete until around the time of birth, either shortly before, during, or just afterward. I emphasized this concept by joining my hands at the base of my palms, forming a 90-degree angle. Then I slowly closed my hands so that the rest of my palms and my fingers met, like the universal hand symbol for prayer, denoting the gradual attachment of the soul to the body. You can never harm or kill a soul, I added. The soul is immortal and indestructible. It will find a way to return, if that is the plan. What do you mean? Pedro asked. I have had cases where the same soul, after a miscarriage or abortion, comes back to the same parents in their next baby. Incredible, Pedro responded. His face appeared brighter now, not so guilty or embarrassed. You never know, I added. After a few moments of contemplation, Pedro sighed again and crossed his legs, adjusting his pants. We had shifted back into the history-taking mode. What happened after that? I asked. After graduation, I went back home. At first I worked in the factories, learning more about the business. Later on I came to Miami to run the business here and abroad. I've been here since, he explained. How's the business going? Very well, but it occupies too much of my time. Is that a big problem? It doesn't help my love life, Pedro said, grinning. He was not entirely joking. Now 29 years old, he felt that he was racing past the time to find love, marry, and start a family. Racing, but no prospects. Are you having relationships with women? Yes, he answered, but nothing special. I haven't really fallen in love. I hope I can, he added with some concern in his voice. I will very soon have to return to Mexico and live there, Pedro mused, in order to take over my brother's duties. Perhaps I will meet someone there, he commented without conviction. I wondered if his mother's critic ISMS of Pedro's girlfriends and the experience of the affair and the abortion were psychological obstacles to a loving and intimate relationship. We would look at those issues later, I thought. And how's your family in Mexico? I asked, lightening the mood while continuing to collect information. They are well. My father is more than 70 now, so my brother and I, Pedro stopped abruptly. He swallowed and took a deep breath before resuming. So I have more responsibility in the business, he concluded in a quiet voice. My mother is also well. He paused before amending his answer. But they are both not coping well with the death. It has taken a great deal out of them. They have grown much older. And your sister? She is sad also, but she has her husband and her children, Pedro explained. I nodded my head in understanding. She had more distractions to help her cope. Pedro was in excellent physical health. His only complaint was of intermittent pain in his neck and left shoulder, But this problem had been present for a very long time, and doctors had not found anything unusual. I've learned to live with it, Pedro told me. I became aware of time. Looking at my watch, I saw that we had run 20 minutes late. My internal alarm clock was usually much more reliable. I must have been really absorbed in the drama of Pedro's story, I rationalized silently, unaware that even more absorbing dramas were only now beginning to unfold. The Vietnamese Buddhist monk and philosopher, Thich Nhat Hanh, writes about enjoying a good cup of tea. You must be completely awake in the present to enjoy the tea. Only in the awareness of the present can your hands feel the pleasant warmth of the cup. Only in the present can you savor the aroma, taste the sweetness, appreciate the delicacy. If you are ruminating about the past or worrying about the future, you will completely miss the experience of enjoying the cup of tea. You will look down at the cup, and the tea will be gone. Life is like that. If you are not fully in the present, you will look around and it will be gone. You will have missed the feel, the aroma, the delicacy and beauty of life. It will seem to be speeding past you. The past is finished. Learn from it and let it go. The future is not even here yet. Plan for it, but do not waste your time worrying about it. Worrying is worthless. When you stop ruminating about what has already happened, when you stop worrying about what might never happen, then you will be in the present moment. Then you will begin to experience joy in life.